Treasure Oma sat at the far end of a rooftop wedding venue wearing a deep green slip dress, watching her ex-husband press his lips to her younger sisters under an arch of white roses. The Atlanta skyline burned gold and amber behind them. Cameras flashed. Guests rose to their feet. Her mother pressed both hands to her chest like she was watching the most beautiful thing she had ever seen in her life. And Treasure sat perfectly still, alone at the corner table her own family had assigned her, clapping with hands that didn't feel like hers, because that is what strong women do. They perform grace at the exact moment they're being erased. What Treasure didn't know was that the most dangerous man in Atlanta was standing 20 feet away from her, and he wasn't watching the couple under the arch. He was watching her. He had been watching her since the moment she walked in. His name was Harry J. Korean, sharp-featured, immaculately dressed in a black suit that cost more than most people's rent, with tattoos crawling up the side of his neck that told a story no one in this venue was brave enough to ask about. He wasn't there for the wedding. He hadn't come to network or celebrate or raise a glass to the happy couple. He came for one reason, and one reason only, because 3 years ago, Treasure Oma had done something for him that no one in his world had ever done before. She chose to save him when every person in that room had already decided he wasn't worth saving. And a man like Harry J. does not forget a debt like that. But here's what makes this story different from every love story you have ever heard. Before this night was over, Treasure was going to discover something that cracked her entire world open. Something that would show her that the man she had given 6 years of her life to, the man now kissing her sister 20 feet away, had been quietly destroying her from the inside the whole time. And the only person who was going to be standing with her when she found out was the most feared man in Atlanta, a man who had no business being at this wedding, but came anyway because she once reminded him that his life still mattered. And before the story is over, she's going to remind herself of the exact same thing.
Everyone keeps clapping like nothing happened. He said we'd build a life together, but the papers told me otherwise long before today. I should be happy for him.
If this story already has a hold on you, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Because this story right here, is for every woman who has been the strong one, the steady one, the one who holds everything together while quietly falling apart inside. Your story is not over, and neither is Treasure's. Chapter 1. To understand how Treasure Oma ended up sitting alone at her ex-husband's wedding to her own sister, you have to understand what kind of woman she was before any of this happened. And to understand that, you have to go back 6 years. Back to a Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta, where a 27-year-old licensed social worker with natural box braids and a canvas tote bag full of case files sat across from a man named Marcus Webb and thought, for the very first time in her carefully structured life, that maybe she had found someone worth building something with. Marcus was 31 when they met. He was tall, easy with his smile, and had the particular kind of charm that works best on capable women, the kind that says, "I am going somewhere. I just need someone who believes in me." He was running a small construction outfit out of a shared office in Decatur, bidding on residential renovation contracts that mostly fell through, driving a truck with a cracked dashboard that he called temporary. He was broke in the way that looks like ambition if you squint hard enough, and Treasure, who had spent her entire career helping people find solid ground, looked at Marcus Webb and saw a project she was willing to take on. What she did not see, because she was 27 and in love and had spent her whole life being the responsible one, was that Marcus did not want a partner. He wanted a foundation, and Treasure was the most solid thing he had ever stood on. Within 8 months, he had moved into her apartment in Buckhead, the one she had saved for 2 years to afford, the one with the good light and the small balcony where she drank her coffee every morning before work. He called it their place within a week of moving in, and Treasure let it go because she was generous like that.
She was always generous like that.
Within the first year, she had cleared $14,000 of his business debt using the money she had set aside for her own continuing education credits. She told herself it was an investment in their future. She told herself that is what you do for someone you love. She paid utilities, groceries, the internet bill, the car insurance on the truck he refused to trade, and even when it started stalling on the highway. She covered the gaps in his income so quietly and so consistently that Marcus stopped noticing the gaps at all. He just knew they were always covered. He just knew Treasure would handle it. She worked rotating caseloads at a nonprofit crisis center in Southwest Atlanta, carrying up to 30 active clients at a time. People in the worst moments of their lives who needed someone steady and present and unshakable. She gave that to strangers all day, every day, and then she came home and gave whatever was left to Marcus. She meal prepped his lunches on Sundays. She attended his networking dinners and smiled at his potential clients and told anyone who asked that she believed in him, because she did. She genuinely did. That was the part that made all of it so much worse. She was not naive. She was not foolish. She simply believed in someone who was keeping score in a way she did not know about yet. In the 4th year, something shifted. Marcus landed a subcontract on a mixed-use development in Old 4th Ward. Nothing enormous, but enough to get his foot in the door with a commercial developer named Bryce Holloway who had real money and real connections. Suddenly, Marcus was coming home late. Suddenly, there were dinners she was not invited to, golf weekends in Augusta with Bryce's associates, a new wardrobe that appeared without explanation. Suddenly, Treasure's job was cute. He started using that word, cute, to describe the work she did. The clients, the caseloads, the salary. Cute. Like she was a child who had set up a lemonade stand. He started talking about the women in Bryce's circle, their yoga practices, their interior design businesses, the way they carried themselves at client events. And Treasure would look down at her hands, chapped from constant sanitizing, and feel herself becoming invisible in the one place she was supposed to be seen. 8 months after the Old 4th Ward project wrapped, Marcus's firm landed its first major government contract, a $2.3 million streetscape renovation in Cobb County. His commission was substantial. His name appeared in a trade publication. He came home that evening and sat across from Treasure at the kitchen table they had eaten at together for 5 years, and said, without preamble, without tenderness, without the courtesy of a conversation, "I think we want different things. I need someone who fits where I am going now." He handed her a folder with divorce papers 3 days later.
No counseling.
No attempt. No explanation beyond the sentence he had already delivered like a business memo. Treasure signed them. Not because she did not hurt, but because she had spent 6 years learning to manage her pain quietly, and old habits do not break in a single afternoon. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, a cream envelope arrived at her apartment. Inside was a wedding invitation. Calligraphy. Embossed edges. Marcus Webb and Simone Oma request the honor of your presence.
Simone.
Her sister, 26 years old, never held a full-time job in her life, running a candle and lifestyle brand on social media that Treasure had co-signed a $30,000 small business loan for 2 years earlier because their mother had asked her to. Her sister, her own sister, and her mother called within the hour, not to check on Treasure, not to acknowledge what this was, but to say, "Baby, you have to come. People will talk if you don't. You're the strong one. You can handle this." So Treasure came. She put on her deep green slip dress. She did her braids. She sat at the corner table her family assigned her at the far edge of the rooftop venue, surrounded by white roses and golden hour light, and a skyline that had no idea what it was witnessing, and she clapped with hands that didn't feel like hers while her ex-husband married her younger sister 20 feet away. And the whole time, she told herself the same thing she had been telling herself for 6 years. Just hold it together. Just be the strong one. Just get through this, and you can fall apart later in private the way you always do. What Treasure could not have known, sitting at that corner table, performing grace with everything she had left, was that someone was watching her. Not Marcus. Not Simone. Not her mother. Someone else entirely. And his presence at this wedding was about to change the direction of her entire life. Chapter 2. His name was Harry J., and he was not supposed to be there. He was 36 years old, Korean, and had grown up in Busan before his family relocated to Atlanta when he was 9. He had sharp features, dark eyes that gave nothing away, and tattoos that climbed from his collarbone up the left side of his neck in dense black lines. The kind that told a story if you knew how to read it. The kind that made people in expensive venues step subtly to one side when he walked past. He wore a black suit that had been made specifically for him. He held a glass of whiskey he had not touched. And from the moment Treasure Oma walked into that rooftop venue, he had not taken his eyes off her. Harry J. ran the most organized and least visible criminal operation in Atlanta. He did not deal in chaos. He dealt in structure, in leverage, in the kind of quiet power that never needed to raise its voice because it had already arranged every room before walking into it. His organization controlled supply chains, protected territories, and maintained a code of conduct that most legitimate businesses could not claim. He was feared precisely because he was disciplined, and he had not become what he was by making impulsive decisions. This was an impulsive decision. 3 years earlier, Treasure had been facilitating a crisis intervention at a community center in Midtown Atlanta on a Thursday evening. She was running a de-escalation session for a group of men referred through a court diversion program, a routine session, the kind she ran twice a week, in a multipurpose room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, and a water cooler that made noise every 4 minutes. Halfway through the session, 2 men entered from the side hallway. Men who did not belong there, men who were moving with the specific purpose of people who had come to deliver a message rather than receive one. What followed happened in under 2 minutes. Shouting, a chair thrown, a gun drawn. And Harry J., who had been in that building for reasons that had nothing to do with the court diversion program, caught a bullet in the side before anyone could stop it. Everyone in that room froze. The facilitator from the other organization backed against the wall. The men from the court program hit the floor. And Treasure Oma, who had 30 active crisis clients and 11 years of de-escalation training and absolutely no reason to step toward a bleeding man with gang tattoos, when every instinct said step back, stepped forward. She moved toward Harry with the calm focus of someone who had made a decision before her mind caught up with it. She pressed her cardigan against the wound. She told him to stay with her. She told him, in a voice that was quiet enough to cut through the noise, "You are not going anywhere. Not today. You still matter." She managed the room, kept people back, directed someone to call an ambulance, and stayed with Harry until paramedics arrived. She held pressure on that wound for 11 minutes. He was conscious the entire time. He did not look at the ceiling or the floor. He looked at her face. He survived. Treasure filed her incident report, went home, and did not think about it again the way she did not think about any of the moments in her work that cost her something. She filed them, put them away, and kept moving. Harry did not forget. He made inquiries, learned her name, confirmed she had no idea who he was when she helped him, and filed that knowledge somewhere private and permanent. 2 months ago, Marcus Webb, who had been circling Harry's investment network through Bryce Holloway, sent a mass invitation to his entire business contact list, attached to a glossy wedding program. Harry's assistant flagged it on a Tuesday morning and set it on his desk without a word. Harry read the guest list. He saw the name Treasure Oma listed under family of the bride, former spouse of the groom. He sat still for a long time. Then he told his assistant to clear his Saturday. He came to the wedding the way he did most things, without announcing himself, without explanation, and with absolute clarity about why he was there. Not to invest. Not to network. Not to give Marcus Webb any more of his time than the man had already wasted trying to get it. He came because the woman who told him he still mattered was being publicly discarded by the man she had built from nothing, and he was not willing to let that happen without at least being present. Without at least bearing witness. When the ceremony ended and guests began filtering toward the reception, Harry positioned himself near the edge of the venue and watched Treasure navigate the room with the careful composure of a woman who had been performing strength for so long she had forgotten she was performing. He watched her mother walk past her table, without stopping. He watched Marcus work the room with his new wife on his arm, laughing too loudly, never once glancing toward the corner. He watched Treasure smooth the front of her green dress and pick up her phone and look at it without seeing it. And then he picked up his whiskey, set it back down untouched, and walked toward her table. He did not sit. He stood at a measured distance, hands in his pockets, and waited until she looked up. She did not recognize him immediately.
He could see that.
He watched the searching look in her eyes, the cataloging, the reaching, and gave her time. 3 years was a long time. She had seen hundreds of people in crisis in 3 years. He understood that. "I was at the Midtown Community Center," he said quietly. 3 years ago. You kept pressure on a wound for 11 minutes and told me I was not going anywhere.
He watched it land.
The flicker first, then the widening. Then the careful stillness of someone who has recognized something significant and is deciding how to hold it. He told her his name. He told her, without embellishment or apology, exactly how he had come to be standing at this wedding, the investment inquiries, the mass invitation, the guest list, the moment he saw her name next to the words former spouse of the groom. He told her he had not come to offer her anything. He had come because she deserved at least one person standing in this room who knew what she was actually worth. She stared at him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were dry, but only just. She asked him what he wanted. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a black business card with embossed lettering, and held it out.
Nothing tonight, he said.
But keep that, because I don't think this night is finished surprising you yet. And when it does, you're going to want someone in your corner who does not need you to be okay. She took the card. Her fingers were cold. He noticed. He said nothing about it. He gave her a single nod, not the nod of someone who expected anything in return, but the nod of someone who had done the one thing they came to do, and walked back toward the edge of the venue. Treasure sat with the card in her hand and watched him go. She did not know yet what was waiting for her on her phone. She did not know that within the hour, everything she thought she understood about the last 6 years of her life was about to be dismantled line by line on a credit report she had never asked to see. She did not know that the man who had just walked away was the only person at this entire wedding who had shown up specifically for her. She only knew that for the first time all evening, something inside her had shifted. Like a window cracked open in a room that had been sealed too long. Like the first breath after holding it for 6 years. She looked down at the card. Then she looked back at the reception. Then she opened her phone and everything changed. Chapter 3. The reception had the surface texture of joy. A jazz quartet setting up near the bar. Waiters moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. White roses everywhere, on the tables, strung through the railings, arranged in towering clusters near the dance floor as if someone had wanted to make absolutely certain that beauty was visible from every angle. Treasure made her way back to her corner table, sat down, and folded her hands in her lap. Her assigned seat had no place card. No name. Just a chair at the edge of things, the way she had always been arranged. Useful enough to include, inconvenient enough to keep at the periphery. Her mother, Adiz, drifted past in a gold-embroidered gown, laughing at something a distant aunt had said, her joy untouched by anything as inconvenient as the awareness that one of her daughters was sitting alone 20 feet away. Adiz Oma was 59, a woman who had raised 2 daughters after their father passed away when Treasure was 14 and Simone was 8, and who had spent the years since then sorting her children into categories. Treasure was capable, so Treasure was fine. Simone was sensitive, so Simone required tending. This was not cruelty. It was something more insidious. It was the comfortable, unexamined assumption that the strong one does not bleed. Simone found her table within 20 minutes. She was luminous in her fitted white gown, veil trailing, bouquet of white roses still in her hand, radiating the kind of happiness that only looks like happiness if you do not look at the eyes. Simone's eyes were measuring. They had always been measuring. She stopped at Treasure's table, tilted her head in the way she had done since childhood when she wanted to perform softness, and said, "I'm so glad you came, Treasure. It really means everything to me. It means everything to us." Treasure looked at her sister, the same face she had protected since Simone was 8 years old and crying at their father's graveside. The same woman who had sent Marcus text messages, long, intimate, deliberate text messages, while Treasure was working double caseloads to keep their household running. She had found out about those messages 6 months after the divorce, when a mutual friend forwarded a screenshot without context. She had read them once, closed the app, and never mentioned it to anyone, because that is what Treasure did. She absorbed things. She processed them alone. She kept moving. "I came because I was asked to," Treasure said. "Congratulations, Simone."
No worms. No embrace.
Just the minimum required by survival. Simone held her gaze for 1 second longer than was comfortable, then smiled the smile of a woman who had gotten exactly what she wanted and needed everyone to know it, and floated back toward her husband, toward Treasure's ex-husband, toward the man Treasure had spent 6 years constructing from debt and broken ambition into someone worth marrying. Treasure picked up her phone. She had 2 notifications. One was a text from a colleague asking about Monday's caseload schedule. The other was from her professional licensing board, the Georgia Board of Social Workers, marked urgent. She opened it with the mild alertness of someone expecting a routine administrative update. A preliminary inquiry had been opened against her license. A fraudulent professional credential bearing her license number had been used to co-sign a commercial business loan. She was requested to respond within 15 business days with documentation establishing she had not authorized its use. She read it twice. Then she opened her credit monitoring app. What she saw made the sound of the reception disappear entirely. Not fade, disappear. The jazz quartet, the champagne glasses, the laughter, her mother's voice somewhere across the room. All of it went silent the way sound goes silent when the brain decides something else is more important than the external world. 6 fraudulent accounts. All opened within the last 3 years. All bearing her name, her social security number, addresses she had lived at during her marriage to Marcus. A commercial loan for $45,000, co-signed using her social work license number without her knowledge or consent. 2 business credit cards, combined limit $38,000, both maxed. A equipment financing line for $22,000. A personal loan for $15,000. Total fraudulent debt sitting against her name, just over $120,000. Every dollar of it funneled, she would later confirm, into Marcus Webb's construction business. His rise, his government contract, his new life in a world where Treasure's usefulness had been extracted completely and her name was the last thing left worth taking. She sat with the phone in both hands and felt something she had no immediate name for. It was not grief. She had already grieved him. It was not shock. Some part of her, the part trained to recognize the behavioral patterns of exploitation, had registered something was wrong long before this moment. What it was, she would understand later, was clarity. The cold, crystallizing clarity of finally seeing the full picture after years of only being shown the parts that kept her cooperative. Her hands were shaking when she opened her clutch and found Harry J's business card. Black. Embossed. A number. Nothing else. She looked at it for 30 seconds. Then she stood, smoothed her green dress, picked up her bag, and walked through the reception without stopping, past her mother, past the jazz quartet, past the white roses and the champagne, and the careful architecture of a celebration built on her erasure, and out into the parking lot where the Atlanta night was warm and smelled like honeysuckle and car exhaust, and the particular freedom of a decision already made. She pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. "Where are you?" he said. Not a question. A readiness.
"Still at the venue," she said.
Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I found something on my credit report, and my licensing board just flagged a fraudulent credential. She stopped. She was not accustomed to saying the next part. "I need someone to help me think through this." There was no pause on his end.
No surprise.
No performance of urgency. Just, "I will be there in 20 minutes. Don't go back inside." She stood in the parking lot in her green dress, with $120,000 of stolen debt on her phone screen, and the sound of her ex-husband's wedding reception filtering through the venue walls, and she felt, beneath all of it, beneath the fury and the violation and the exhaustion of finally understanding the full scope of what had been done to her, something that surprised her completely. She felt, for the first time in 6 years, like she was not alone. She did not know yet what that would cost her. She did not know yet what it would require of her, what she would have to face, what she would have to release. She only knew that a man she had once refused to leave bleeding on a floor was pulling into the parking lot in a black car, and that she was about to make a choice that would change the rest of her life. Chapter 4. The diner was on Ponce de Leon, a 24-hour place with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that had been humming at the same frequency since 1987. The kind of place where the coffee was bad and reliable and nobody asked what you were doing there at 11:30 on a Saturday night in a formal dress. A woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain refilled their cups without being asked and left them alone with the practiced discretion of someone who had seen every kind of conversation happen in these booths and knew better than to get involved. Treasure had changed nothing. She was still in the green dress, still carrying the small beaded clutch, still wearing the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was following it through before the fear caught up. Harry had taken off his jacket when he sat down, folded it over the back of the booth, and rolled his sleeves to the elbow in a single unhurried motion. His forearms were tattooed, dense, detailed work that continued the narrative from his neck downward. He looked less like a wedding guest now, and more like what he actually was, a man completely at ease with the parts of himself that made other people uncomfortable. She slid her phone across the table, without preamble. He picked it up. He read in silence, not skimming, reading. His expression did not change, not at the dollar amounts, not at the fraudulent credential, not at the addresses, not at the loan dates that aligned with near-perfect precision to the timeline of Marcus Webb's professional ascent. He scrolled slowly and methodically, the way someone reads when they're building a picture rather than just absorbing information. When he set the phone down, he set it down carefully, face up, like it was evidence, which it was. He looked at her. What do you want to do about this? The question landed differently than she expected. Not what are you going to do? Not what should you do? What do you want? Present tense. Active voice. As if her desire was the relevant starting point rather than an inconvenience to be worked around. She answered before she had time to soften it. I want every single consequence he is coming to him. I want it documented, prosecuted, and public. I want him to answer for this in a courtroom. Harry nodded once. The nod of someone receiving information they already suspected.
Good, he said.
Then here is what that actually looks like. He did not offer to fix it. This was the thing she would return to later, the thing she would describe to Dr. Portia Adewale during their first meeting as the moment she understood she was not being managed. He laid out the process with the precision of someone who had navigated institutions from both sides and understood exactly where they were penetrable. She would need a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud cases against intimate partners, someone who could document the full chain of evidence, match signatures, establish a timeline, and build a case strong enough to survive a defense attorney's attempt to frame the whole thing as a bitter divorce dispute. She would need to file a criminal complaint with the Atlanta Police Department and simultaneously open formal disputes with all 3 credit bureaus. She would need to respond to the licensing board inquiry herself, directly, with complete transparency and a documented paper trail that made it unmistakably clear she was the victim of credential theft rather than a participant in fraud. And she would need to be prepared for Marcus to characterize her as vindictive, unstable, a woman scorned. Because that was always the defense.
It was always that.
He reached into the inside pocket of his folded jacket and produced a second business card. Not his. He slid it across the table. Dr. Portia Adewale, forensic accountant, financial abuse recovery specialist. 15 years working exclusively with survivors of partner fraud. She has testified in federal court. She is expensive and she is worth every dollar, and I will cover the initial retainer, which you will pay back however and whenever you choose to. Treasure looked at the card. She looked at him. What is the catch?
No catch.
Men like you do not do things without a reason. Harry was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone choosing a careful lie. The quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. Then, 3 years ago you pressed your cardigan against a bullet wound and told a stranger he was not going anywhere. In my world, Treasure, nobody does that. Nobody steps toward the thing everyone else is running from. Not for a person they don't know. Not without calculating what is in it for them first. You did not calculate. You just acted. He held her gaze. I have not forgotten that. I do not intend to. She believed him. She was not sure she should, and she believed him anyway. Then he did something she had not expected. He told her the truth about himself. Not a performance of honesty, the actual thing. He told her what his organization was and how it operated. He told her that people who became close to him sometimes became targets, that the danger was real and not theoretical, that there had been situations in the past 2 years that had required him to make decisions he could not undo and would not pretend were clean. He told her he was not asking her to accept any of that. He was telling her because she deserved to make an informed choice about whether his help was worth the proximity. He said it the way someone says something they have rehearsed, not because it was scripted, but because he had thought about this moment before it arrived and had decided in advance that he would not lie to her. "You saved my life by refusing to write me off," he said. "The least I can do is let you see exactly who I am before you decide if I am worth keeping around." They stayed in that booth until 3 in the morning. The woman with the reading glasses refilled their coffee 4 times and brought a slice of peach pie nobody ordered, but both of them ate. They talked about things that were not the fraud case, about the crisis center, about the particular exhaustion of carrying other people's worst moments, about growing up in Busan and then being transplanted to Atlanta at 9 years old and spending years learning how to move between 2 worlds, neither of which ever fully claimed him, about losing her father at 14, about what it does to a girl when the adults around her decide she is old enough to stop needing to be taken care of. He did not try to make her feel better. He did not tell her it would be okay. He sat across from her in a 24-hour diner on Ponce de Leon and treated her like someone who deserved the truth in full, and that alone, that simple, radical act of not managing her, was more than anyone had given her in 6 years. She drove home alone at 3:15 in the morning. The Atlanta streets were quiet and amberlit, and she drove without music, just the hum of the engine and the knowledge of what Monday morning was going to require of her. She was not afraid. She was many things. She was furious. She was exhausted. She was still absorbing the scale of what Marcus had done, but she was not afraid. For the first time in a very long time, Treasure Oma felt like herself. Not the useful version. Not the strong for everyone else version. Herself. Awake and intact and already building the plan. She parked in her building garage, took the elevator up, walked into her apartment, and sat on the edge of her bed with Dr. Portia Adewale's business card in her hand. She set her alarm for 7. She was going to need the whole weekend to pull the documentation together before Monday's call. She was going to do this correctly. She was going to do this all the way. She set the card on her nightstand, lay back, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across the city, her ex-husband was on his honeymoon. Somewhere across the city, her mother was probably asleep and unbothered. And somewhere across the city, a man with tattoos on his neck who ran the kind of operation that operated in the spaces between laws was, she suspected, still awake, not because he was worried about her, but because a man like Harry J. did not worry. He prepared. She was starting to think she had spent 6 years with entirely the wrong kind of man. Chapter 5. Dr. Portia Adewale's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Atlanta, 3 blocks from the courthouse, which Treasure would later understand was not a coincidence. Everything about Portia Adewale was deliberate. The charcoal suit, the reading glasses she wore on her face rather than on a chain, the desk that held exactly the documents relevant to the current case, and nothing else. She was 48, Nigerian-American, the daughter of an accountant and a civil rights attorney, and she had spent 15 years doing the one thing she was built for, taking apart the financial architecture that abusive partners construct on the backs of the women they exploit, and laying the evidence out in a courtroom with the precision of someone who understood that numbers do not lie even when people do. She had already reviewed the documents Treasure emailed over the weekend before Treasure sat down. She had a printed summary on her desk with 3 columns, account name, date opened, dollar amount, and she had already annotated it in red pen. When Treasure settled into the chair across from her, Portia did not ask how she was doing. She said, "Your signatures do not match on a single one of these documents. I can confirm that just from the photocopies. A handwriting analyst will make it definitive. And your address history places you at a different residence when 4 of the 6 accounts were opened. This is a clean case." She looked up from her glasses. "If you want to pursue it all the way, I will take it all the way," Treasure said. "All the way." Portia nodded once, the same way Harry had nodded, without drama, without celebration, just the acknowledgement of a decision received and accepted. Then she opened a new folder and began. For the next 2 hours, Portia walked Treasure through the complete strategy with the patience and thoroughness of someone who had given this particular briefing many times and understood that the details mattered as much as the overview. The criminal complaint would be filed at the Atlanta Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. Treasure would need to bring printed copies of every fraudulent account statement, the licensing board notification, the loan applications she had never signed, and a personal affidavit attesting to the timeline of her marriage, her separation, and the fraudulent activity. The credit bureau disputes would be filed simultaneously, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, with full documentation attached. Portia had templates ready. She had filed so many of these that the templates had templates. The licensing board response was the most urgent, Portia explained, because Treasure's professional standing was the thread Marcus had pulled most recklessly. A social work license was not just a credential. It was a career, a livelihood, a legal authorization to practice. Marcus had used it as collateral without a moment's consideration for what its revocation would cost her, because he had never, Portia said evenly, thought of her license as belonging to her. He had thought of it the way he thought of everything she owned, as a resource available to him. Treasure's throat tightened at that, not because it was new information, because it was the clearest articulation she had ever heard of something she had felt for years without having the language for it. She signed the authorization forms. Her hand was steady. Portia reviewed each signature with a brief, approving attention of someone confirming that the document was complete rather than assessing her client's emotional state, and Treasure appreciated that more than she could have explained. She did not need to be asked if she was okay. She needed to be treated like a woman who had a case worth building, and that is exactly what Portia Adewale did. She left the office at 4:30 in the afternoon with a folder full of dispute letters, a police report appointment scheduled for the following morning, and the specific, grounding sensation of someone who has moved from enduring a thing to fighting it. The sky over downtown Atlanta was pale and cooling, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside the building and breathed it in. Her phone rang at 6:15. She was home by then, at her kitchen table with the folder open and a cup of tea cooling beside her laptop, working through the supporting documentation Portia needed by end of week. The name on the screen was one she had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Adiz. She answered. Her mother's voice came through the phone like a verdict. Word had reached her, probably from Simone, probably within the hour, that Treasure had left the reception abruptly and that a police report had been filed against Marcus. Adiz did not ask what had happened. She did not ask if Treasure was safe or hurt or needed anything. She said, "What have you done?" Her voice carried the particular compression of a woman who had decided the correct emotional response before picking up the phone. "You are going to destroy this family. Simone is your sister. He is her husband. Whatever happened between you and Marcus is in the past, and you need to leave it there." Treasure sat with the phone against her ear and listened to her mother list every consequence this would have for Simone, for the family's reputation, for the relationships Adiz had spent years building in their church community. She listened to the word selfish used 4 times in 3 minutes. She listened to the suggestion that she was acting out of jealousy, out of bitterness, out of the inability to accept that Marcus had simply moved on. And when her mother finished, Treasure said something she had been swallowing for 20 years. She said it quietly and completely, without raising her voice, without apology. "Mama," she said, "the man who you just asked me to protect used my professional license to steal $120,000 in my name. He forged my signature on 6 accounts. He used my credentials to build the business that bought him the life he left me for. And the first call you made was not to ask if I was okay. It was to tell me to be quiet."
She paused.
"I have been quiet my entire life for this family. I am done being quiet now." Adiz's voice went cold. "If you press these charges, Treasure, you will not have a family to come back to. Tina will not forgive you. I will not forgive you." Treasure looked around her apartment. The neat bookshelf. The small plant on the windowsill she had kept alive for 2 years. The empty chair across the kitchen table that had been empty since the night Marcus took his things and left. The life she had built entirely by herself, for herself, held together by herself. "Then I will build something else," she said. And she hung up. She blocked her mother's number. She blocked Simone's number. She left the family group chat, the one where her mother sent devotional verses every morning and Simone posted flat lay photos of her candle products. She did it without ceremony. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, hands trembling slightly, heart pounding, and felt, flooding up through all of it, clean and wide and disorienting, something she had not felt in longer than she could measure. Relief. Not happiness. Relief. The specific, physical relief of a woman who has put down something very heavy that she has been carrying for so long she forgot she was carrying it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harry. "How did tonight go?" She typed back, "I filed the police report appointment for tomorrow. I saw Portia. And I just cut off my mother and my sister." A pause. Then, "I don't know if I should feel this calm about that." 3 dots appeared. "Then you should. It means you're finally taking yourself seriously. Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts the real work." She set her phone face down on the table and looked at the folder in front of her. $120,000. 6 forged accounts. A professional license used as a theft instrument. A man who had watched her hold his world together for 6 years and had concluded, in the end, that the most valuable thing about her was her good name. She thought about that for a long time. Then she opened the folder, picked up her pen, and started working. Chapter 6. Atlanta Superior Court was a building that did not try to make you comfortable. High ceilings. Marble floors that amplified every footstep. Fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like a slightly worse version of themselves, which Treasure had always thought was intentional, a leveling. A reminder that this room answered to evidence rather than impression. She walked in on a Tuesday morning 3 months after the wedding wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse she had pressed twice the night before, and she felt, the moment her shoes hit that marble, the particular rightness of a woman who is prepared for something difficult and is no longer afraid of it. Dr. Portia Adewale sat beside her in the front row, a binder of evidence on her lap thick enough to be used as a doorstop. It contained 4 months of work, forensic accounting reports, handwriting analysis confirming that not a single signature on any fraudulent document matched Treasure's verified samples, bank records showing the precise routing of every loan disbursement into Marcus Webb's business operating account, time-stamped credential usage logs, and a 40-page chronological affidavit from Treasure herself. Portia had reviewed it so many times she could cite page numbers from memory. She was calm in the way that thoroughness produces calm, not the absence of awareness, but the presence of preparation. Across the aisle, Marcus Webb sat with his defense attorney, a man named Gerald Osei, who was expensive and smooth and had spent the better part of 4 months trying to characterize Treasure in every pretrial motion as a bitter ex-wife with a vendetta. The strategy was as old as the crime: make the victims anger the story instead of the defendant's actions. Reframe prosecution as persecution. Gerald Osei was good at it. He was not good enough. Beside Marcus, 1 row back, sat Simone. She wore black. She looked hollowed in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the slow, grinding dawning of consequences she had not calculated when she had decided Marcus Webb was worth having. The prosecutor, a woman named Assistant DA Renee Tatum, built the case brick by brick and did not hurry. She presented the 6 fraudulent accounts in sequence. She called the handwriting analyst, who testified for 45 minutes and used the phrase definitively inconsistent 14 times to describe the relationship between the forged signatures and Treasure's verified handwriting. She entered the bank records into evidence and walked the jury through each routing, each date, each dollar amount, the way a teacher walks students through a math problem, patiently, completely, leaving no step unexplained. She called Dr. Portia Adewale, who testified about the forensic accounting findings with the authority of someone who has done this enough times to know exactly which questions are coming and has already prepared the answer. Then she called Treasure. Treasure walked to the witness stand with the same focused quiet she brought to her hardest caseloads, the ones where a family's future depended on her ability to be accurate and present and unshakable simultaneously. She sat. She adjusted the microphone. She looked at the prosecutor. She did not look at Marcus. Assistant DA Tatum asked her to describe the financial arrangements of her marriage. Treasure described them. 6 years. His debts cleared before they were formally together. The shared apartment that was hers before it was theirs. The groceries, the utilities, the car note, the networking expenses, the business loan ideas she had funded, the salary that had covered every gap in his income for most of a decade. She did not perform emotion. She did not need to. The numbers performed it for her. She was asked about the fraudulent accounts. She said, for each one, clearly and without hesitation, I did not open this account. I did not sign this document. I did not authorize this use of my credentials. She said it 11 times across 11 questions, and her voice did not waver once. Gerald Osei cross-examined her for 40 minutes. He asked if she had ever given verbal permission for Marcus to use her credit. She said no. He asked if it was possible. She had simply forgotten. She said, I did not forget, because I was never asked. He suggested the accounts might have been opened during a period of marital unity when informal arrangements were made. She said, there is no informal arrangement that authorizes identity theft. He tried 4 different angles to make her look like a woman acting from heartbreak rather than harm. She answered every one of them with facts,
Dates.
account numbers, documentation references. She answered the way someone answers when they have the truth and they know where it is, and they are not afraid of the question. The jury took 3 hours and 50 minutes. Treasure sat in the courthouse hallway with Portia and a cup of coffee that had gone cold and felt the strange, suspended quality of waiting for something that is already decided. The outcome existed. She simply did not know what it was yet. Portia worked on something on her laptop. Neither of them talked much. There was nothing left to do, and both of them knew it. When the bailiff appeared in the hallway doorway, they both stood without being asked. The judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts: identity theft, fraud in the first degree, professional credential fraud, criminal forgery. Sentencing in 6 weeks. Restitution to be calculated and ordered in full. Bail revoked pending sentencing, given the financial complexity of the case and the risk of asset concealment. The gavel came down. Marcus's face went the particular gray of a man who had genuinely not believed, until this moment, that consequences had his name on them. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder. He did not respond to it. Outside on the courthouse steps, the Atlanta afternoon was bright and warm and indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. Portia hugged Treasure on the steps, a brief, firm, real embrace, and said, "You held that witness stand like someone who always knew she would win." Treasure did not answer right away. Her throat was too full of something that was not quite crying but was in the same neighborhood. She breathed through it and held herself steady, the way she always did, except this time the steadiness was not for anyone else. It was just hers. She was walking toward the parking garage when Simone appeared at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She had come separately, left separately, and had apparently waited, which was its own kind of information. She looked reduced. The careful Instagram presentation completely gone. Hair pulled back, no makeup. The expensive black dress slightly wrinkled as though she had sat in it for hours. She said Treasure's name like a question. Treasure stopped.
I didn't know, Simone said.
About the accounts. About the license. I swear to you, Treasure, I did not know any of that. Her voice broke on the last words in a way that sounded real. Maybe it was. That wasn't the point. Treasure looked at her sister for a long moment. The same face that had belonged to the 8-year-old she had held at their father's funeral. The same face that had sent Marcus messages calling her boring and basic while Treasure was working double caseloads to keep his life running. Both of those things were true simultaneously. They had always been true simultaneously. You didn't know about the accounts, Treasure said. But you knew who he was. You knew what kind of man chooses his ex-wife's sister. You knew what you were doing when you did it. She did not raise her voice. There was no need. The truth did not require volume. She just thought it wouldn't happen to you. Simone opened her mouth. Treasure shook her head once. She turned and walked to her car. She did not hear if Simone said anything else. She had already moved past the point where it mattered. Chapter 7. The Georgia Board of Social Workers issued its formal findings 6 weeks after the criminal verdict. Treasure received the letter on a Thursday morning while she was sitting at her kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and a caseload review that needed to be submitted by noon. The letter was 2 pages. She read both of them. After full investigation and review of the submitted documentation, the board finds no basis for disciplinary action against licensee Treasure Oma. The fraudulent use of her credentials has been confirmed to have occurred without her knowledge or consent. Her license record has been annotated accordingly. Her standing is fully restored. The case is closed. She set the letter down. She drank her coffee. She submitted the caseload review by noon. The restitution order had come through 2 weeks earlier, $127,400, calculated to include the full fraudulent debt plus interest and legal fees, to be paid in automatic monthly installments directly into a recovery account Portia had helped her establish. Marcus had been sentenced to 22 months in Fulton County Jail. His construction license had been suspended pending a separate civil review. The Cobb County Streetscape contract, the $2.3 million project that had been his crowning achievement, the thing he had used Treasure's name and credentials and credit to finance his way toward, had been terminated when the county's legal team learned of the criminal conviction. The company was effectively dissolved. Everything he had built on her name was coming apart on its own timeline without her having to do anything further to accelerate it. Treasure did not feel triumphant about this. She noted it.
She moved on.
What she was focused on, in the weeks following the verdict, was the job posting she had been staring at since it appeared on the Crisis Center's internal board 4 months earlier. Senior Program Director. She had passed it over when she first saw it, not because she was unqualified, but because Marcus had spent years calling her ambitions inconvenient, and old voices take longer to stop than old relationships. She had filed it away, told herself maybe later, given her energy to the fraud case instead. But the case was closed now. Her license was clean. Her credit had climbed from 498 to a 671, and Portia assured her it would continue rising as the fraudulent accounts were fully removed and the restitution payments posted. She had no more good reasons to wait. She had only the leftover habit of making herself smaller, which she was actively working to break. She submitted the application on a Wednesday evening at her kitchen table in sweatpants, with the television off and the window open and the Atlanta summer noise coming in from the street. She did the written exam the following week, a comprehensive test on program management, crisis response protocols, Georgia Social Services regulations, and staff supervision models. She prepared for the panel interview the way she prepared for testimony, thoroughly, specifically, without performing more certainty than she actually had, because real confidence does not need to be louder than the evidence. She researched each panel member. She drafted responses to likely questions and read them aloud in her bathroom mirror until they sounded like conversation rather than recitation. The interview was on a Tuesday morning. 3 panelists. The executive director, a man named Dr. Samuel Okafor, who had built the Crisis Center from a 12-person operation into the largest community mental health resource in Southwest Atlanta over 20 years. The clinical director, a woman named Paulette. A senior program manager named Derek, who had worked at the center for 11 years and whose peer reviews of Treasure's work, she had learned through a colleague, had consistently rated her in the top 5% of staff. She walked into that conference room and took her seat and did not make herself smaller. They asked how she would handle a direct report who was undermining team cohesion. She described the approach she had developed over a decade of managing difficult interpersonal dynamics in crisis environments, direct conversation first, documentation second, escalation only when the pattern continued, and the impact on client care required it. They asked about budget management under resource constraints. She talked about the specific strategies she had implemented in her current caseload to reduce administrative overhead and improve client outcome metrics with numbers. They asked about her vision for the program. She told them exactly what she saw, clearly and without hedging, because she had thought about it for 4 months and she believed it. Dr. Okafor asked the last question. He leaned forward slightly and said, "Tell us about a time when doing the right thing required you to act without institutional support." Treasure thought of Harry J. bleeding on the floor of a community center in Midtown. She thought of the attending physician who had wanted to leave him. She thought of every moment in the last year where she had acted on what she knew to be right despite every structural pressure towards silence. She did not tell him those specific stories. She talked about the principle, about the times in her career when the ethical obligation was clear and the institutional backing was absent, and she had made the choice anyway because you do not get to wait for permission to do what you know is correct. She talked about it as a professional value. She meant it as a personal one. Dr. Okafor wrote something down. Paulette nodded slowly. Derek was already smiling. The call came 8 days later. She was in the parking lot of the crisis center, eating a sandwich in her car during a 20-minute lunch window, when her phone rang from an unknown number. She answered with her mouth still full and recovered in under a second. Dr. Okafor offered her the position in the first 10 seconds of the call. $31,000 salary increase. Full administrative authority over the senior program. Start date in 4 weeks. She sat in her car for a full 2 minutes after she hung up. Not crying, not shouting, just sitting with a particular weight of something you have been working toward for so long that its arrival feels almost surreal. She had not been carried here. Nobody had opened this door for her. She had built the case, filed a report, testified in court, submitted the application, walked into the panel interview, and answered every question with the truth. She had done all of it, and it had worked. And she had not yet fully processed the fact that she was allowed to let that mean something. That evening, Harry took her to dinner at a quiet Korean restaurant in Castleberry Hill, one of those family-owned places that seated maybe 40 people and had a menu written by hand and a woman in the kitchen who sent extra dishes to Harry's table without being asked because he was a regular and she approved of the woman he had brought. They ate well. They talked easily. At one point, Harry looked across the table at her and said, "You know the difference between you 3 months ago and you right now?" She raised an eyebrow. 3 months ago you described what you wanted to happen, he said. Tonight you're describing what you did. She thought about that on the drive home. She was still thinking about it when she unlocked her apartment door, kicked off her shoes, and poured herself a glass of red wine she had been saving since January. She stood at the window with it and looked at the Atlanta lights and felt, carefully, like something new and not yet fully trusted, proud of herself. Not the reflexive, deflecting kind of pride that immediately lists the caveats. The clean kind. The kind that sits still and accepts itself. Her savings account had $4,200 in it. The first money she had ever held that carried no one else's name. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification from a number she did not recognize. She listened to the first 3 seconds and recognized her mother's voice. She listened to the whole thing. 2 minutes and 40 seconds of Adiz Oma, not the cold, weaponized version. Not the performance of maternal authority, just a tired woman on a phone saying she was sorry. Not explaining it. Not defending anything. Just, "I'm sorry, Treasure. I hope you're okay." She said it twice. The voicemail ended. Treasure held the phone for a moment. Then she saved the voicemail to a folder and put her phone face down on the counter. She picked up her wine. She looked out the window. She did not need to respond tonight. Maybe not ever. Some apologies arrive long after the damage they are apologizing for has already restructured the landscape entirely, and the only honest response is to acknowledge them in your own time, on your own terms, or not at all. Outside, Atlanta continued. The lights held. The night was warm. Treasure almost stood at her window in her own apartment in her own life, and let herself simply be in it. Chapter 8. It was a Wednesday evening in late October when Treasure walked out of the crisis center and found Simone sitting on the front steps. She almost did not recognize her at first. Not because Simone had changed dramatically, but because the particular quality that had always defined her, the careful, maintained presentation, the Instagram-ready posture, the performance of a life that looked better from the outside than it was completely gone. She was wearing jeans and an oversized jacket, and her hair was in a ponytail that had not been touched since morning.
No makeup.
No statement earrings. No phone in her hand. She was sitting with her elbows on her knees and her eyes on the sidewalk, and she looked like someone who had run out of places to go and had ended up here the way water ends up at the lowest point, not by choice, but by the simple operation of gravity. Treasure stopped on the second step. She did not say her sister's name. She waited. Simone looked up. Her eyes were red at the edges. She said, "I didn't know where else to come." Treasure stood still and let that sit in the air between them, without rushing to fill it. Simone told her what had happened since the verdict, not in an organized way, but in the exhausted, non-linear way of someone who has been holding too many things and can no longer sort them. Marcus had been incarcerated 6 weeks earlier. In the weeks between the verdict and the sentencing, he had become someone she did not recognize, blaming her, blaming Treasure, blaming Bryce Holloway, blaming the economy, blaming every external force he could locate rather than himself. He had told her, twice, that if she had been more supportive of his business, none of this would have happened. He had said this to a woman who had not even known the business was being financed through stolen credentials. The candle and lifestyle brand had lost its audience. The story had circulated, as these stories do, through the particular social media ecosystem where it was both compelling and devastating to watch, and the comment sections had been vicious before they went silent, which was somehow worse. The small business loan Treasure had co-signed for, Simone had not been able to make the payments since the brand collapsed. The lender had been in contact. She was 2 months behind on her apartment rent. Their mother, embarrassed by the visibility of the whole thing, had declined to help. She had told Simone that she needed to sort out the consequences of her own choices, which was, Treasure noted with a particular private irony, the first time in either of their lives that their mother had applied that logic to Simone. When Simone finished talking, she looked at Treasure with the specific expression of someone who is hoping that what they have just described is sufficient to produce the response they need. Help. Rescue. The older sister dynamic, alive and operational, Treasure stepping in the way she always had. "I'm sorry you're in this position," Treasure said.
Her voice was calm.
She meant it. She had no pleasure in Simone's unraveling. She had never wanted this to be the outcome. "But I'm not the person you come to for this. Not anymore." Simone's face shifted. The plea sharpened. "Treasure, I'm your sister." Treasure looked at her.
She took her time.
She wanted to say this correctly, not for Simone's benefit, but for her own, because she had rehearsed this moment in her head for months, not with rage, but with the careful precision of someone who understood that the words mattered, and the delivery mattered, and the truth of it mattered most of all. "You are my sister," she said. "And for 33 years, that meant I would show up for you no matter what you did, or what it cost me. I co-signed your loan. I covered your rent 3 separate times. I showed up at every crisis, and I never asked you to be held accountable for a single one of them, because Mama told me that was what love looked like, and I believed her." She paused. "You sent Marcus messages for months while I was still married to him. You called me boring. You said I smelled like work. You told him you were everything I never was. And then you married him. And I came to the wedding because I was asked to keep the peace. And the whole time, he was using my name to steal from me." She did not raise her voice.
She did not need to.
"And not once in all of that did you call to ask if I was okay." Simone was crying now. Open, genuine crying, the kind that is not performed. Treasure watched it and felt compassion for it and did not move toward it. "I made a mistake," Simone said. "I know that. But I have nobody left, Treasure. I have nowhere to go." "There are resources," Treasure said, because she was a social worker, and she could not say it. She named 2, a financial counseling nonprofit and a housing assistance program she had referred clients to. She would have said the same thing to a stranger on the street. She said it to Simone with the same measured care. "I can give you those contacts, but I cannot be your soft place to land right now. I cannot keep being the person who absorbs the cost of your choices while you move on to the next thing. That is not love. That is just me being used twice." Simone looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the ground. Then she stood, slowly, and adjusted her jacket. She did not argue further. Maybe she had finally heard something. Maybe she was simply out of arguments. Either way, she walked down the steps without another word, and Treasure watched her go until she turned the corner. She stood on the steps for a while after that. The October evening was cool, and the street was quiet, and her hands were not shaking. She had expected them to shake. They did not. She had set the boundary and held it, and the world had not ended, and she had not dissolved. She was still here, still intact, just lighter, the way she always felt when she put something down that she had been carrying too long. She drove to Harry's apartment. She had not called ahead. She texted from the lobby, "I'm downstairs." He texted back, "Doors open." His apartment was warm, floor-to-ceiling windows, dark wood floors, a kitchen that smelled like something being made slowly and well. He did not ask what happened when she walked in. He looked at her face and moved to the kitchen and started water for tea. She sat on his couch and took off her shoes and pulled her feet up under her and listened to the small, ordinary sounds of a pot and a kettle and a man moving around a kitchen without needing to fill the silence with anything. He brought her tea, a Korean herbal blend, honey-colored, that tasted like ginger and warmth and something she did not have a name for. He sat down at the other end of the couch. He did not ask if she was okay. He already knew she was. He asked instead, "Did you say what you needed to say?" "Yes," she said. "Did it hold?" "It held." He nodded.
Good.
He reached over and turned on low music, something instrumental and unhurried, and they sat in the city-lit quiet of his apartment and drank their tea and said nothing for a long time, and the nothing was full and comfortable and the specific kind of restful that only comes when you are exactly where you are supposed to be. At some point, Treasure said, "I keep thinking about what my mother said to me when my father died. I was 14. She took me aside at the repast and said, 'You're the strong one now. Tina needs you to be okay, so I can take care of her.' She was quiet. I was 14, and I had just lost my father, and she was telling me it was time to stop needing things." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "How old were you the first time you asked for something for yourself?"
Treasure thought about it. Genuinely thought about it.
She could not find the memory. Harry nodded like that was the answer he expected, and the answer broke something open in her chest that she had not known was still sealed. She did not cry. She just sat with it, the long, accumulated weight of a life spent anticipating everyone else's needs because her own had been defined as inconvenient since she was old enough to carry the load. She sat with it and let Harry sit with her in it, and he did not try to resolve it or fix it or make it mean something instructive. He just stayed. That was the thing about Harry J that she had not been able to explain to herself in all the months of trying to understand what he was to her. He was dangerous. He operated in spaces she would never fully see and did not ask to. He had told her things about his organization that she had filed carefully in the part of herself that was realistic about the world's actual architecture. She was not naive about what he was. But he had never once, in all the months she had known him, asked her to be smaller, had never once treated her pain as inconvenient, had never once needed her to be okay before she actually was. She rested her head against his shoulder. He let her. Neither of them said anything about what it meant. It meant exactly what it was. Two people who had both survived things by being harder than the things that came for them, finally allowing themselves to be soft in the same room at the same time. She went home at midnight. She slept without setting an alarm for the first time in 8 months. And in the morning she woke up and made coffee and stood at her window and felt, running underneath everything like a current, quiet and persistent and entirely her own, peace. Chapter 9. 9 months after the wedding, Treasure Oma walked out of the crisis center at 6:15 on a Thursday evening and stood for a moment on the front steps just to feel the air. The Atlanta summer had finally given way to something breathable, that particular September quality the city occasionally produced, cool-edged and golden, like it was apologizing for August. The streets smelled like cut grass and someone's takeout and the particular exhaust and concrete mix that was Atlanta at dusk, which she had lived with long enough to find beautiful. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. She had earned the pause. Harry was parked across the street, leaning against the passenger side of his car, phone in hand, scrolled to something he probably would not tell her about. He was wearing a dark jacket, collar open, the neck tattoos visible in the evening light, the same tattoos she had once registered with clinical detachment in a community center in Midtown and now registered as simply part of the face that had been present for everything that mattered in the last 9 months. He looked up when she came down the steps. He straightened.
He put his phone away.
He did not wave or call out. He just waited, the way he always waited, not performing patience, just having it. She crossed the street and he opened the passenger door without asking if she wanted a ride because they were past the point of asking questions they already knew the answers to. She got in. He got in. He pulled out into traffic and they drove without destination for a few minutes before she said, unprompted, "I think today was the first day in 9 months that I got through a full shift without thinking about the case." Harry glanced at her. And it felt like something closed. In a good way. He nodded once. They drove toward Castleberry Hill. His apartment was the same as it always was, warm, minimalist, the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows in that particular way that made Atlanta look more graceful than it was. He cooked while she sat at the kitchen island and talked about her day. A breakthrough with a client she had been working with for 6 weeks, a staffing issue she had resolved without it becoming a department-wide problem, a new community partnership she was developing with a Midtown youth program that she was genuinely excited about. She talked about it the way she had talked about her work before Marcus had started calling it cute, with a full investment of someone who understood exactly why it mattered and did not feel the need to apologize for caring. Harry made doenjang jjigae, a rich, slow-simmered fermented soybean stew that he set in front of her in a stone pot still bubbling at the edges, with rice and a spread of small side dishes across the counter between them. She ate with the appetite of someone who had worked a full day and was not performing anything for anyone. He watched her eat with the expression he had when he thought she wasn't looking, something careful and warm and privately proud, the expression of a man who does not often let himself feel things without armor and is slowly learning that some things are worth the exposure. He asked about Portia. Treasure told him the most recent restitution payment had posted, the 14th consecutive automatic deposit. She told him her credit score had reached 706 that week, the first time it had cleared 700 in her adult life, untouched by Marcus's debt, rebuilt entirely from her own payment history. She told him the savings account was holding $11,000. Harry set down his chopsticks. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know what that number means," he said. She smiled. "It means I have never in my life had $11,000 that was only mine." He picked his chopsticks back up.
"Good," he said.
"Don't let anybody else's name on it." After dinner they sat on the balcony. The city spread below them, lit and moving and indifferent and beautiful. The skyline she had looked at 9 months ago through champagne glass reflections at a rooftop wedding while her ex-husband kissed her sister in front of white roses. The same skyline. Completely different position. She had not thought about Marcus in 3 weeks. She noticed that now, the absence of the thought rather than the thought itself, and found it as significant as anything the case had produced. Harry sat beside her in the kind of easy quiet that only happens between people who have stopped needing to fill the space. He said eventually, "Can I tell you something?" She looked at him. "When I hired my first forensic accountant," he said, "I was 29 and someone had been skimming for my operation for 2 years. A man I trusted. I didn't press charges. I handled it the way my world handles those things."
He paused.
"I used to think that was strength."
He looked at the city.
"Watching you go through a courtroom and come out on the other side, not because you had to, but because you decided that was how it was going to go. That took something I don't have a word for in either of my languages." He looked at her. "I want you to know I saw it. All of it. Every step." Treasure felt the words settle into her the way true things settle, not explosively, but completely, the way water finds every level. She had not needed him to see it. She had done it for herself. But being seen by someone who understood what it cost, that was something different. That was the part she had not let herself want until it was already happening. She said, "You told me the night we met that you were not a good man." He said, "I'm not." She said, "I know." She looked at the skyline. "You're also the only person who showed up at that wedding for me, who sat in a diner at midnight and told me the truth about yourself before you told me anything else, who connected me to Portia and then stepped back and let me fight my own case." She turned and looked at him directly. "That's not nothing. Whatever else it is, it's not nothing." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "I am still dangerous, Treasure. My world is still what it is. There are going to be things I can't tell you. Situations I am going to handle in ways you will not fully see and may not want to. I know that too." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for honest. And you have been the most honest person in my life since the night we met." He reached over and covered her hand with his. Not a gesture of rescue. Not a claim. The kind of touch that says, "I am here and I am staying, and that is the only promise I know how to make." She turned her hand over and held his back. They stayed on that balcony for a long time after that, watching the city breathe, the September air cool around them, the lights of Atlanta below them steady and indifferent, and somehow comforting in that. She was not waiting for anything. She was not performing anything. She was not holding herself together for anyone else's benefit. She was simply present, in her own life, with a man who had never once asked her to be less than she was, and the city that had watched her get erased 9 months ago was now watching her take up exactly as much space as she deserved. She thought about the woman in the green dress sitting alone at the corner table, hands that didn't feel like hers, a family that had assigned her a seat at the edge of everything and called it love, a credit report she had been too afraid to open. She thought about the parking lot, the phone call on the second ring, the diner at midnight, the courtroom, the license board letter on her kitchen table, the savings account with $11,000 in it that had nobody's name but hers. She had not been rescued. She had been witnessed. And the difference between those two things was everything. Harry's hand was warm in hers. The city glittered below. And Treasure Oma, for the first time in 33 years, felt like she was exactly where she had always been going, not because she had arrived, but because she had finally stopped walking in a direction someone else had chosen for her. 1 year after the wedding, Marcus Webb was serving 22 months in Fulton County Jail. His construction license had been suspended. His government contract was permanently terminated. Bryce Holloway had quietly distanced himself from every professional association with Marcus the week after the verdict and had never looked back. Simone had moved to Savannah. She was working at a small cafe near the riverfront, sharing an apartment with a roommate, living more quietly than she ever had. They had not spoken. Treasure did not lose sleep over it. Their mother had called twice since the voicemail. Treasure had answered the second time, and they had spoken for 11 minutes, carefully, with a specific restraint of two people who understand that something has been permanently rearranged between them and are learning to navigate the new shape of it. It was not repaired. It was acknowledged. That was enough for now. Treasure Oma was a senior program director with a clean license, a 714 credit score, and $14,000 in a savings account that belonged entirely to her. Harry J. was still, by every technical measure, not a good man. He told her so regularly, and she believed him, and she stayed anyway, because honesty from someone dangerous was still rarer than comfort from someone who had already proven they would lie. She was not waiting to be chosen. She had already chosen herself. 9 months ago, in a parking lot in a green dress, with a credit report she hadn't asked to see and a phone number she hadn't planned to call, she had decided that her story wasn't finished just because someone else had tried to write the ending. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing you are finally choosing for yourself today? I want to read every single one. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this story, share it with her right now. She is not alone. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourself, beautiful. You deserve it.